Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I am here this week with Gabrielle Celeste. Gabrielle is an intuitive astrologer and a spiritual and clairsentient healer. I'm so excited to dive into that. She uses astrology as a modality to help her clients better understand themselves and their unique cosmic blueprint. Welcome, Gabrielle. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Oh, hi, Eileen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. For listeners, Gabrielle also is a host of the Spiritual Sisters podcast, and they had me on. We recorded last week, I think, at the time of this recording. So it'll be fun to have a listen to both of those. Go give them a follow. And Gabrielle, the way that I usually like to start these podcasts is by asking my guests a little bit about their journey into the woo and that spirituality piece that informs their work these days. I know that you've been in the corporate world for a lot of your adult life, so I'm curious if spirituality is something that's always been present for you, or if it's something that you came to or returned to later in life, and how that informs what you do now.
Oh, I love that question. And I love the phrase of returning to. So I had grown up within a Catholic family, and that's primarily my background. And, this world that I'm now in and work in professionally was very taboo. And it was not something that you were to engage in or anything like that because it goes against most of the Catholic teachings and whatnot. And I went to schools that had a religious focus from literally preschool all the way up until I graduated with my master's. So I went to Lutheran University. So religion was always intertwined throughout my entire education, from preschool to elementary, junior high, high school, and then, my collegiate, my graduate studies. And I had always known that there was another side to it because my parents, although we do have that Catholic background and we still do align with some of the beliefs, they were very open to this world. They knew that there's another side, that spirits were very much a thing. And both my parents are highly intuitive themselves. So my dad's clairvoyant and my mom gets premonitions, and the astrologers actually come from her side of the family. But I really didn't know any of this. I think I was familiar with it, but I really didn't know until my Saturn return, which is that really fun. Well, it can be fun for some, but not all. And for me, it definitely wasn't. And it's that astrological initiation into adulthood beginning at the age of 27, and it lasts till about 30 or so. And at age 27, I had put in so much time focused in my career and getting all the degrees and the accolades because that was the path that, I thought I had to follow. And at that point, I had already had maybe, close to 8 years under my belt working in a professional corporate setting. And I had a job as a 26, 27-year-old that people in their 40s would kill for. Some people would, right? And I had a big responsibility on my hands because at the time I was working for a company that was within a 4-year plus internal and external investigation that involved the FBI and the federal government.
Oh, wow.
And so, long story short, we could totally get into it, but I was made to be the fall guy for a multi-million-dollar investigation, and that was my Saturn return. So I was like, WTF? What is going on?
Oh my goodness.
I know. Yeah, you can't make this up, right? It literally is out of a movie. And it was, vividly, I remember these dates. And now as an astrologer, I go back and I look at the dates retrospectively. I'm like, oh, this is what was happening in my chart. This is what was happening. And that's how I came to astrology, which was the gateway drug to the spiritual world that I live and breathe now. So I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, why am I in this position? I did not do anything to deserve this. And now looking back, I was like, oh, this is divine orchestration to pretty much leave and follow the path that I am on now because I wouldn't have left otherwise. And so my girlfriend, she is actually her and her mom, they're yoga teachers, and she introduced me. She's a Vedic astrologer. Her mom, also my good friend now. And she had explained this, and this is what's going on. And this was right around the time that 2020 started or had happened. And we all know what happened. at that time.
We all know what happened in 2020. Yeah.
Yep. I got into the spiritual work though at the end of 2018, and I had been really curious about it, and I started a lot of the internal work at the end of 2018 and into 2019, and thank the Lord that I did, because had I not, I don't know that I would have handled it with as much grace as I had when 2020 hit. And that was, a 2-year process. And in that process, I had found astrology. I came to study it. I founded my now business practice that's focused primarily on astrology and intuitive readings. And that's kind of the gist of how I got into this work. So yeah, it's a longer story. We have a couple podcast episodes about our spiritual awakening and how we both got into the work, Nicole and I, who I believe will also be featured on your show as well. And it's just a lot. So here we are today in 2024, and the business is progressing. And now I really support intuitive healers and business owners with the toolbox that I have built to aid them in their spiritual journey, and ultimately just really helping them find out what their soul's true purpose and calling is by way of their birth chart and intuitive readings.
Amazing. I love that. It's so interesting how many people have that kind of connection that's always there, but not prevalent, not at the forefront, not explicit. Mm-hmm. And very common story to have that more Catholic or Christian upbringing. I think you're in California, I'm up in Canada, but both countries definitely Christianity has heavily influenced our cultures. But it's curious, or I love that your parents, despite that religious faith, still had an awareness and an openness to the more woo side of things. Oh, totally. I think that's something that's been really interesting in my own exploration of journeying into spirituality and thinking more about the breadth of understandings and potentially even of realities that exist, is that I've actually softened towards a lot of the religious groups or ideas that I used to just be very firmly nope, it's terrible, it's awful. And so to have that kind of perspective, and the insider perspective is also interesting. I'm curious because you mentioned this term, and I don't actually know much about the differences. You mentioned Vedic astrology. Mm-hmm. And I know there's Vedic and traditional. Is that the other term for it? And
so
what's
I believe
the
it's
difference?
Yeah, it's Eastern Western, and I practice Placidus, which is Western practice. Vedic is Eastern, and Placidus focuses primarily on not whole sign, but it gets really into the details in the houses of the chart where it starts, and very much focuses on the specific numbers and degrees that the planets are sitting at. And honestly, the way that I've observed, I don't know too much about how Vedic works and is structured, but they're very much looking at the same thing. They just have different ways of explaining it. And I think that's very similar for a lot of the modalities that fall into the line of spirituality. And so, for example, tarot, the tarot very much coincides with the zodiac. Numerology very much works with the planets as well. So they're all kind of working to create a comprehensive system while still being their own individual systems as well. And Vedic, they have different names for the planets. Even the structure of the chart is very different. I couldn't give you too many specifics about it, but it is very accurate in terms of, for me and what I've observed, you can get very much into specific timeframes in which certain experiences or transitions will occur, where I don't really practice that in Placidus. So I know, for example, and this is kind of a little bit morbid and extreme, but with Vedic astrology, you can kind of get it down to, this is when you're probably going to transition according to the planets. And I kind of steer away from that.
Right. Interesting. Fascinating. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's more than I knew. I knew there existed this kind of dichotomy, but I didn't have that understanding. And as you were speaking, it struck me kind of that it is with all the different traditions or explanatory frameworks, it's as though there is a little bit of kind of a core root of truth in a way, and that there's just lots of different systems that have found their own ways to explain that truth or that coherence through different modalities, different thinkers. So I'm really curious about kind of some of the how around the way that you use your astrological understanding, people's birth charts when it comes to the business coaching. Oh, and do you do like the person's chart or the business's chart or both?
Yes, I do both. I primarily look at the person's chart before I go into the business's chart. So for me, intuitively, I'm highly clairsentient. And so I'm a triple water sign. I'm a Cancer sun, Pisces moon, Pisces rising. Most of my planets in my birth chart are in water, and water is a highly intuitive element. And so I'm a feeler. So I'm more porous in terms of like feeling emotions of others. And it's very important for me to be mindful of my environment and who I'm around because I can pick up on that. And so I'm more porous than I would like to be at times. And for me, that certainly translates into my work and me reading the chart itself. And so I can look at the chart and I pretty much have an idea of what the planets are trying to tell me. And this was actually something that came up for me when I was studying with my teachers, where I was like, this, and this means that. And they were like, well, how did you get there? And I was like, I don't know. I just know it. And I also have Saturn in the 12th. So I think part of it is me having been an astrologer in a past life. So that's karmic clearing for me in this lifetime. So anyways, I can intuitively sense like what the planets are trying to tell me alongside, of course, now nearly 4 years of learning astrology and astrological placements and continuing that education, because learning astrology doesn't really ever stop because there's just so many years worth of knowledge and information. And so anyways, I'll look at one's chart and I'll get an idea of their rising sign, their sun, their north node, and really just identify what they're here to work and work out in terms of karma. And usually I focus on that. Oftentimes, depending on the reading that my client has paid for, I'll focus on the chart in the second half of the reading, because in the first half of the reading, something that I like to do, and oftentimes the astrology is confirming it for me after the fact, and I don't want to be influenced by it, is I energetically go into one's, auric field and read the chakras. I can do healings, and then I often do a combination of chakras and then the Akashic records. So going into that and just kind of seeing what's going on for them. So that's pretty much like the first part of the session. And then the second half is using the astrology to see really what's coming through. And 10 times out of 10, the astrology will confirm what I'm getting in the energy. And so usually from there, if they're just looking for an idea of what's coming up for them or what they're really meant to do, that'll come up in that session. And then the business sessions, I'm very much looking at it using my knowledge of the planets and what they represent in terms of business. So anything from like investing to strategy and authority. And I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of this is that person's business chart. But then also I'm reading the energy of the business, because the businesses have energy as well, and they have their own birth chart too. So depending on when you LLC'd, when you first got paid for it, when there's a couple different ways that you can get into the whole structure of a business chart, but that will cast the natal chart for the business, and then you can go from there to see what the business is really trying to do or how to work with the energy of the business from the astrology standpoint.
That's really, really fascinating. Yeah, I love the combination of modalities that you use. And as you're speaking, there was a piece of that story of like, yeah, I just know, and or dropping in intuitively and seeing what the energy gives there, what you're feeling. I often get asked, what kind of healing do you do? And I'm like, I don't actually I mean, I was trained. I have the wild medicine energy healers training, but I don't have a way to describe what I do beyond just I just intuit. I intuit what is needed.
Totally.
Hey, Woo Crew. I wanted to let you know about the summer healing special that I am running. For the months of July, August, and September, I am offering support in the form of remote healing packages. So this looks like bi-weekly remote energy healings and readings with voice note support in between. Really the perfect way to receive healing and guidance through those busy summer months when maybe you don't have time to add another appointment to your calendar. You choose the day of the week, I drop into your energy while you go about your day, and I send over the guidance that I receive from your guides and the healing work that I do, along with any tools or homework that may be useful to you on your journey by voice note. In addition, you get voice note support in between these sessions for the entire month if you are interested in jumping into this, I've left the link to hop on in below, but you can also come on over to Instagram at I am Eileen March or send me an email, Eileen@myluminouslife. I've left a link below as well for a 30-minute free coffee chat to discuss whether this offer is a fit for you.
Okay, for listeners, we've been having technological issues. We will continue on here in Zoom now. So yeah, I think where we dropped off, I was saying that I appreciate that there's that intuitive piece to your readings and what you do. It's not just this, like, I have learned this structure and this system, but there's like that deeper understanding and knowledge. And it reminds me a little bit of the way that the healings that I do work, where I can't really explain how I know or what I'm feeling or getting or why, but it is just this like intuitive hit or this deeper understanding or knowing. And the way that you spoke about using the astrology to confirm and almost just kind of like bolster the intuition that you're experiencing.
Okay, so just curious, where is your North Node in your birth chart?
My North Node is in Taurus.
In which house?
That's a great question. I can find this out for you though, because I have an app for that. I
Amazing.
know I like there's parts of it that I have really memorized and then parts that I always just have to look at. 10th house.
Ooh, okay, career. So last year was a big jump for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Last year, it's actually interesting because last year is when I came out as a witch. And rather than kind of celebrating the beginning of my business as like, this is when my luminous life became a thing, I was like, oh, it feels much better to celebrate my witchiversary as the beginning of this
Oh, I love that.
business,
Yeah.
because it feels like that's when I really found like my niche and my understanding of what I'm doing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Good for you. That's beautiful. That's a big step.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. I love having the support. It's been a big, like, for sure, big year. I'm a Leo rising as well. So with everything that's happening right now, I'm like, what's going on? I'm feeling
Totally.
very activated for the last long while.
Yeah, and Pluto at some point is going to oppose your Leo rising sometime over the next 20 years. So that's another little transformation to look forward to.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's in Aquarius, which is my sun and moon.
Oh, well, maybe sooner, depending on which degree your sun sits at and your moon with Pluto heading over that. Wow. Okay. So big transitions ahead. Love that for you.
Yeah, it's exciting. I feel like I revel in the in the excitement of the transitions as much as sometimes I'm like, can we just have some chill for a while? But yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Where do we want to go? I have so many questions, but actually, this is what I wanted to touch back on, because when you were telling your story about how you came into the more spiritual side of things and the woo, you said astrology was kind of like your gateway drug.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, it was for me as well. When I left my ex, who was like staunchly atheist, astrology is bullshit, doesn't exist, you're making it all up. And so I'd kind of hidden those parts of myself for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. When I first left him, one of the first things I did was, well, I bought my tarot deck, my first one, and I
Mm-hmm.
downloaded an astrology app, which at the time, the pattern is the name of it. And at the time, it didn't have a birth chart in it. It was just telling you things about yourself that you were like, this is eerie.
You're
And
right.
so
Mm-hmm.
it felt like, again, coming back to that sense of, the way you spoke about using the astrology to confirm the intuitive readings that you're doing for people. For me, it was like those little bits of information that were so congruent were like these little nuggets of proof that my brain needed to start to get on board with some of the more woo experiences and things that I was learning or even practicing.
Well, for me, I mean, I got into it because I feel like it found me, astrology, that is, and I didn't have an explanation or an answer for what was going on. I'm like, why is this happening to me? And it just almost poetically, because I feel like astrology definitely has a poetic aspect and side to it. It really was just like this, and this happens. This is the timing of it. And it's a cyclical thing based on where the planets are at and where they were at the moment of your birth. And that's where the predictive element comes in. So being psychic and being an astrologer, I realized after having done, I think I did something crazy by the end of like this past year in 2023, because I launched my business in 2022. And like you get started and you don't really know what you're doing. But I always say to my girlfriends, because I do have a good amount of girlfriends that are intuitive themselves and we're all kind of in this space. And I always say, like, start before you're ready, because your
Mhm.
business is going to show you how it wants to work through you and with you as you as the vessel, because it is, again, it is its own energy working through you. I feel like it chooses you as the vessel to kind of just live out in the 3D form. And Elizabeth, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She also has a book called Big Magic, and it
Yeah.
pretty much talks about, yeah, like if you
There.
don't oh, you have it. Yeah, I love it. Where she talks about like if you up the idea that comes to you, it's going to move on to someone that's going to take advantage and build it out. And so I always say, just go ahead and get started before you feel like you're ready, because your business is going to show you how it wants to work through you and you'll start to see patterns. And that's very much what happened for me. And so by the end of 2023, I think I had completed over like 150 that year alone, which was a lot because I'm, a full-time job as well as I continue to build the foundations for this practice. And I was noticing that I run a highly predictive practice, but oftentimes I get a lot of my predictions more from my intuitive side and my higher self opposed to the astrology. But the astrology again confirms what's going to happen, because psychics are reading the energy of the planets, believe it or
Right.
not. Oh, I don't
Interesting.
know. Yeah, I was telling my girlfriends and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense." And it's really much, it is a thing where you can kind of get an idea where the planets are going, and based off of the history of these cycles and what they have meant over thousands of years, you can surmise what that means specifically to you depending on your specific birth chart, and then again where the planets are going and how they're going to affect your birth chart. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered a question, but it felt called to share.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, because I didn't actually answer a question. I just said a bunch of things and it's like, here's where the conversation is.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. The piece about psychics are just reading the energies of the planets. Like that was kind of a moment of like, oh,
Mhm.
oh,
Yeah. So it's been
yeah.
fun for me to like, also piece together like, okay, like I know that this year these big transits are going to be, well, it's August 19th, so it'll just pass at the time of this, at the time of the drop date. The next one it would be Christmas Eve, and then it'll be again in summer 2025. But we have a transit that's called Jupiter square Saturn. So Jupiter is in Gemini, Saturn's in Pisces. So depending on where that falls in your chart, you can see or at least predict some maybe change or certain things to occur. And for me, for the collective, I'm very much paying attention to those dates. And that's where the element of, you can apply astrology as well. You can apply astrology to really just get an idea of what your cosmic makeup is, like what types of characteristics, strengths, areas of improvement that you pretty much are here to work with in this lifetime. And it's really
Mhm.
beautiful because it's specific to you. And I've had the opportunity to read for twins. And I think I read for twins that were born at the same time, if not within 4 minutes of one another. And while their chart was very similar, that's where I add the psychic components to it. And I can, see what their soul is trying to tell me. But even for twins, depending on the time of birth, so depending on like how far apart they are, extracted from the womb or just born, their chart can be different. And that's very different for said twins as well. So it's really wild.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool. Okay, I'm curious. You've mentioned these three dates, the 19th of August, which has just gone by when people are listening, the 24th of December, and
Mm-hmm.
then early next year. What what can we expect? What should we prepare for? It's like, wait, you left us this lovely little nugget of like, it can inform what we're thinking about or preparing for, and then yeah, don't leave
Yeah,
us hanging.
I mean, I'm in the US, so I feel like it's probably going to be something prevalent to just the state of the world in terms of who maybe wins the election or like the early stages of what that's going to look. Compared
Right.
to the astrology and the transits of 2024 and years prior, 2024, believe it or not, is really relatively calm.
Hmm.
Whereas 2025, that's the big one where I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I'm actually sitting with the energy and the transits of 2025 because a lot of the outer planets, so Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, when those are the bigger, the bigger players in the game, they're, I think if not all of them will have or will recently have changed signs. So when outer planets like that make a shift into a sign, signs are also referred to as constellations, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and so forth, all the same thing. When these outer planets change signs, it's a pretty big deal because you can expect some kind of shift to happen on a worldwide scale. So as above, so below, as within, so without. It's that, idiom where it really is just 10 times out of 10, even 11 times out of 10, depending on what the planets are doing in the sky, we here on Earth are absolutely going to, whether or not people are aware of it. So, for example, at time of recording, which we just had the craziest week in the United States. We had an attempted assassination. One potential candidate dropped out. We had the biggest, and this, or actually, no, it might have even been in Northern America, Microsoft outage. Like that all
Right.
coincided
Oh, yeah,
to the
that hit us
day.
too.
Okay, yeah. It just coincided to the date of all of these crazy transits. And so I said that this past week, and I put in my week ahead tarot pool and my newsletter, I said the transits that happened and the events that happened in this past tone for 2025, 2026. So 2024 is very much like a foundation year, but 2025, 2026 expect things to really change. And I wouldn't say that it's going to be at the level that 2020 was, because 2020 was just a really sad year and just a year for a lot of change. But I would say that 2025 is very much up there with 2020.
Mm, mm. Yeah, brace ourselves a little
And I don't
bit.
say that to fear monger or anything, but
Yeah.
it's more just like have an awareness. You can work with that energy and, you can transmute it and co-create with the universe
Yeah.
for the way in which you want it to work for. So that's I
Right.
think why I have a little bit more of a stern outlook on it.
Yeah, I think I love that. I don't know a lot about astrology, but I know more than, a lot of my friends do. And so it's often this like it's descriptive, right? It's telling us
Totally.
about the energies, the kind of overall picture, but it's empowering to know because rather than just being kind of buffeted along by whatever's going on, you can plan, you can prepare. Maybe you don't, we were just joking as the recording was being so glitchy that Mercury is in its pre-retrograde shadow. And so maybe you don't, sign the deed to your new house during Mercury retrograde or
Yeah,
those kinds of things.
totally.
Having that awareness, it's not a space of fear, it's a space of empowered preparation, if you will.
Yeah, and for some people, if you're born under Mercury retrograde is going to be great for you, but it really only happens 3 to 4 times a year. So you would take advantage of however long those retrograde periods are. So yeah, it really is just having like just that understanding of and how it's working with you and how you can use them to your advantage.
Interesting. How do you
Mhm.
figure out if Mercury was retrograde when you were born? I guess there's probably calculators online.
Totally. So yeah, you have your birth time, your date of birth, and your place of birth, and you can put that into an astrological calculator of sort to cast the chart. And usually, if you find, it'll tell you, it depends on that you use. It'll be like, Mercury was retrograde. You can also Google just like, was Mercury retrograde on da 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 da, right? But in a chart, if you're looking at the wheel, usually planets that are retrograde have a little R next to it.
Oh,
Hmm.
interesting. Yay, I'm
Yeah.
learning so many things. I could just
Yeah.
like I could
Yeah.
pick your brain about this all afternoon.
Love
Or,
it.
maybe I just need to book myself in for, for a
Yeah.
session. I've never
Yeah.
actually had a reading. Like I've got the apps and I've got those kinds of do-it-yourself kind of investigations, but I've never actually
Yeah.
done a reading with somebody. So I'll put that on my
Totally.
wish list for,
Yeah.
for the
I would
next
love
little bit.
that. Totally. It's like for me, I always say, and this is even just like from coming for me from a place of study for the other modalities that I have an interest in, because I feel like when you're in this line of work, the the learning never stops just because there's so much to
Right.
learn in general. But I always suggest like getting a reading if you're curious, if you feel like you've learned as much as you can on your own and you're coming to a point where you need some support, or if you know you're blocked, support from
Mm,
someone else who's maybe a couple steps ahead of you. Because oftentimes as healers, I think there might be this misconception that we ourselves don't need, support from others. And that's not
right.
true, because oftentimes for myself, I very much seek out just the wisdom and the guidance from others that I know for me and that can match me on an energetic vibrational level too.
Yeah. Yeah, that it reminded me immediately of uh, midwives can't midwife themselves. Having been
Mm-hmm.
a midwife in my past life, even just, I remember having a pregnant colleague saying she couldn't even palpate her own belly to figure out the position of her baby. It was really hard for her to do, even though it's something she did many, many times a week with
Mm-hmm.
ease. On somebody else, doing it to yourself was hard. And that's a physical, hands-on, tangible, like, just what do you feel under your hands versus the healing. So it often does take that outside perspective and the help to clear something. If we're blocked, there's a reason we're blocked, and sometimes we can work through it on our
Mm-hmm.
own with journaling and our practices. And often, because we are a communal animal, we need that community support.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So for listeners who are as keen and curious as I am to work with you and to get some of your wisdom and insight and healing, what do you have on offer? We've briefly mentioned it, but how do people work with you? What do you have for us?
So my website is www.aguaastrology.com. It's named after my ancestry and also being a triple water sign. You can find me on Instagram at Agua Astrology, AGUA Astrology, no space, all lowercase letters. And I'm also at the Spiritual Sisters podcast. I host that as a co-host with my sister, Nicole Christine. Fun fact, we were born on the same day, exactly 9 years apart. So Syrian love story for sure. And on my website, you can find a bunch of different offerings, different types of readings, and upcoming just services, notices, maybe workshops that I'm doing. You could sign up for my free newsletter. And I'm also in the stage of building out the second pillar, in which I'll focus on consulting and applying my 10 plus years of consulting to help other intuitives, business owners within their business, combining human design and astrology.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even touch on human design today, but
Oh.
those are all wonderful. And I love that experience that you bring for the business side of things, because it's something that's so lacking for so many healers and intuitives, is that they've got this amazing practice to transform lives, and then they're like, oh, but I'm not a marketer, I'm not a copywriter, I don't know how to do this side of business. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, there's a whole other side of it, which is the business. And I was actually, it's so funny you say that. I was reflecting on that earlier today, and I'm like, all right, I got my offerings down. I know pillar and I know how to do readings like on the fly if necessary, but I would say 80 to 85% of the business, even is literally running the business. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I know it's an incredible amount of work that most of us don't realize when we're getting into
Yeah.
it.
It's probably a good thing we didn't know.
Yeah, no, right? I would have been like, fuck that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Well, I, for one, will definitely be getting on your email list as soon as we hang up the call here. And as
Yeah.
always, for all of the listeners, all of those links are going to be below in the show notes, so you can easily access Gabrielle and her beautiful offerings. Is there anything else you'd like to say, share, wrap up with before we go?
I'm so grateful. Thank you for having me on. This was so much fun. Mercury retrograde shadow period. We hope that the editing process is like favorable on your end. And yeah, I can't wait for your episode of our show, and stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure. I will. Thank you so much for coming on. And Woo Crew, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and leave a rating and a review wherever you are listening. And I'll be back next week with another guest episode. Bye for now.